A retired war veteran felt the ground shake beneath his boots one quiet morning. An earthquake, he thought. But when he found a massive sinkhole on his land and climbed inside, what he discovered shocked the nation. Hidden beneath his farm was a tunnel man-made, alive with machines and proof of a secret oil operation that had stolen from his family for generations. This isn't just a story about oil. It's about truth, legacy, and the power of one man who dared to listen when the earth whispered back. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The morning started like any other in the quiet backwoods of East Tennessee. A slow orange sunrise crept over the tree line, warming the frost-bitten edges of old pine branches and sparkling against the morning dew that hung from the porch railing. Caleb Morgan, a Vietnam War veteran in his late 60s, was already up before the sun had time to stretch. His boots were laced, his flannel shirt buttoned all the way to his neck, and that same dusty cap he'd worn since '72 shaded his eyes. The house was silent, save for the crackling of old floorboards and the soft hum of wind moving through the chimney. This land had been his solace for decades. His father had carved life into these hills, and Caleb had spent nearly 40 years doing the same planting, building, surviving. He never married, never left. The land was his companion, his witness, and his healer. But lately, something was off. The dogs barked at shadows. The soil felt strange underfoot. It was as if the mountain was trying to whisper something through the silence. And Caleb, weathered and strong, could feel it in his bones. Something was about to rise. That night, the stillness broke. At first, it was subtle, just a soft rumble beneath the floorboards, like a truck idling miles away. Caleb stirred in bed, half awake, staring at the ceiling. He'd heard noises like that before, deep in the jungle decades ago, low, rhythmic, unsettling, but this was his home. Here, the only thunder came from the sky. Then it hit. The entire house jolted as if God himself had dropped a fist onto the mountainside. The lamp beside his bed crashed to the floor. Windows rattled. The old wood groaned with a sound so deep and desperate it made Caleb's chest tighten. He jumped up, barefoot and bewildered, grabbing the flashlight from the dresser. Outside, the cold hit him first. But then came the silence, the heavy, unnatural kind that follows a scream. The trees weren't moving. The wind had vanished. Even the dogs had gone quiet. He stepped onto the porch and froze. The earth had split open. Across the edge of his field, right near the rusted-out well his father once used, a jagged wound had torn the land in two. It stretched nearly 20 feet across, disappearing into darkness. The soil around it was cracked and broken, like something had tried to force its way out from below. At first, Caleb thought it was just an earthquake. Maybe some old mine shaft had given way. But then came the smell, sharp, chemical, familiar in a way that made his stomach churn. It took him back to the war, to scorched villages and the stench of burning metal. He approached slowly, the beam from his flashlight trembling in his grip. As he neared the edge, he could see it wasn't just a sinkhole. It was too perfect. The hole was round, smooth, artificial. He crouched down, careful not to get too close, and pointed his flashlight into the black. For a moment, it caught nothing but dirt and stone, but then something shimmered. A curve of metal, clean, deliberate, like the corner of a pipe or a door frame, buried beneath decades of soil. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled back, heart racing, memories clashing with the present. He wasn't imagining this. Something was down there, something that didn't belong. The next morning brought no peace. Caleb didn't bother turning on the radio or checking the news. The earth had spoken, and he knew better than to ignore it. He called someone he trusted, Lucas Boyd, a retired firefighter who'd helped Caleb through a barn fire 5 years back. Lucas had a calmness about him, the kind that came from facing death more than once. He showed up in under an hour, truck rumbling up the gravel drive, work boots laced and rope coiled in the back. "Hell of a crater," Lucas muttered, squinting into the pit. "Doesn't look natural." "It's not," Caleb said quietly. "I saw metal. Something man-made." Lucas looked at him. Serious now. "You think someone's been digging?" "I think someone's been hiding," Caleb replied. They rigged a line to the rear axle of Lucas's truck and tied it off to an old oak stump for good measure. Caleb insisted on going first. He'd been through darker places in his life. As he lowered himself down, hand over hand, the air shifted. It grew warmer, heavier, laced with that same acrid stench. The dirt walls around him felt wrong, smooth in places, carved in others. When his boots hit the bottom, he turned slowly, casting the light across the tunnel. It wasn't a natural cavern. It was a corridor. Wide, symmetrical, with blackened veins running through the walls, veins that pulsed faintly in the flashlight's beam. Lucas joined him seconds later, his breath catching the same way. "What the hell is this?" "I don't know," Caleb said, "but it wasn't made by nature." They moved forward cautiously, every footstep echoing like a drum beat. Bits of rusted equipment littered the edge's bolts, pipe fragments, pieces of metal framing. Further in, the tunnel forked. The right path dipped downward, slick with damp soil and stained with a yellowish film that glistened like oil. That's when they heard it. A hum, low, mechanical, alive. Caleb and Lucas stopped. They didn't speak. Words had no place here. This was no abandoned shaft, no old war relic. Someone or something was still down here. They turned back, marking the walls as they went, every fiber of Caleb's being telling him to run. By the time they reached the surface, the sun was already low. They sat on the tailgate of Lucas's truck, sharing a bottle of water, saying nothing. But Caleb knew something that Lucas didn't. That feeling, the one clawing in his chest, the one that hadn't left him since the first tremor, it wasn't fear. It was recognition. He'd felt it before, in a jungle halfway around the world, when something terrible was hiding just beyond the trees. This wasn't over. The earth had opened its mouth, and it hadn't finished speaking. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. Every groan of the old cabin made his muscles tense. The shadows stretched longer than they should have. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder, as if time itself was pressing against him. By midnight, he found himself back outside, flashlight in hand, standing at the edge of the chasm, the same one that had split his land and his peace wide open. He aimed the beam downward. It disappeared into the blackness, swallowed whole. The hole didn't look like a sinkhole anymore. It looked like an entrance. Caleb felt it in his bones. This wasn't some accident. It was a door. By morning, his mind was made up. He needed answers, not guesses. He dialed another number, Aria Lambert, a young environmental scientist who'd helped him test his well water last spring after a local factory leak. She was sharp, unflinching, and had once sued a waste company into shutdown. He told her everything. By noon, Aria's battered Subaru crunched into the gravel, and she stepped out with a satchel of equipment slung over one shoulder and determination in her stride. Lucas arrived soon after, saying little, but with that fire in his eyes that Caleb had come to respect over the years. Together, they stood at the sinkhole, now cordoned off with orange tape Aria insisted on bringing. She checked gas levels, snapped photos, took soil samples, and finally gave a single nod. "We go in," she said, "but we go prepared." They descended as a team, roped and masked, their lights cutting through the darkness like knives. The tunnel was worse than before. The air was heavier, the sulfur stronger. The pulsing veins in the walls shimmered like something alive. Further in, they found the fork again. This time, they took the left path. It dipped more steeply, curving into a lower chamber. The temperature rose. So did the smell. Then they heard it. A hum no longer faint, no longer distant. It was near. Machinery. Pumps. Voices. They crouched low and rounded a bend. That's when they saw it. A cavern, wide and reinforced with rusted beams. In the center sat a machine, massive and groaning, surrounded by vats and coiled pipes. Black crude oil oozed from a cracked valve and pooled into a shallow trough in the dirt. 3 men moved around it, all in blue jumpsuits, their faces hidden by masks. Caleb's breath caught, the insignia on their sleeves MLB. He raised his camera, slowly, carefully. He recorded everything: the machine, the leaks, the men, the barrels marked with serial numbers. Arya followed, taking photos, scanning the air with a device clipped to her vest. "Industrial grade," she whispered. "Active operation, right under your field." A cold knot twisted in Caleb's gut. This wasn't just illegal. It was theft. Lucas stood by the tunnel entrance, keeping watch, jaw clenched, hands resting near the crowbar slung at his side. Then came the crackle of a radio. One of the workers straightened. Voices echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Footsteps. "Time to go," Caleb said, his voice low and calm, but edged with urgency. They pulled back, retracing their steps, ducking behind rusted barrels and stacks of equipment. The light of the exit appeared in the distance like salvation. They didn't stop until they were above ground, gasping in the cold air, sweat streaked with dirt, lungs burning. No one spoke. Not yet. They had seen too much. They had proof. Later that night, in the dim light of Caleb's kitchen, they laid everything out: the photos, the footage, the samples. Arya uploaded the data to 3 secure drives and burned backup copies onto disks. "This isn't just about oil," she said. "This is about decades of cover-up. This is systemic." Caleb sat back in his chair, eyes locked on the flickering image of the machine on the screen. "They took it from my father, my grandfather. From everyone who ever trusted this land would be left alone." Lucas uncapped a bottle of whiskey and set it between them. "You going to take this to the papers?" Caleb nodded. "And the state and the EPA and whoever else will listen." Silence settled for a moment, then Arya leaned forward, her voice steady but fierce. "They're going to fight back." Caleb looked at her. "Then let 'em." He stood, crossed the room, and opened the back door. The night air poured in, cool and damp. The field beyond was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. He turned back to them, his voice steady as stone. "They've been hiding in the dark long enough. It's time to turn on the light." For the first time in decades, Caleb Morgan felt like a stranger on his own land. Every step across his field, every creak of his porch, every whisper of wind through the trees carried a weight he couldn't shake. The routines that once grounded him: feeding the dogs, mending the fence, stacking wood, now felt hollow, mechanical. His hands moved, but his mind was still trapped beneath the soil. The tunnel, the oil, the men in uniforms that bore a name no one ever told him about. He couldn't stop seeing it: the slow leak of black crude, the humming pipes, the schematics Arya had unfolded against the cave wall like a map of betrayal. He'd tried to justify it at first. Maybe it was old. Maybe someone forgot to close it down. But deep down, he knew better. That operation wasn't abandoned. It was thriving, active, quiet, and precisely designed to go unnoticed. The worst part wasn't the machinery. It was the intent. Whoever had done this didn't make a mistake. They didn't forget to file paperwork. They didn't miscalculate a boundary. They had counted on people like Caleb never looking too deep, never asking questions, never knowing. And for nearly 4 decades, he hadn't. That shame dug deeper than any trench. He needed answers, not guesses, not theories. So the next morning, Caleb drove 30 miles north to the county records office, a place he hadn't visited since the day his father passed and handed the land title to him. The office hadn't changed much. Flickering lights, stale coffee. A clerk behind the counter who looked up just long enough to wave him toward the back room. "Surveys are in the cabinets along the west wall," she said without glancing away from her crossword puzzle. "Start with land permits from the 50s. He spent hours there, sifting through maps yellowed with age and deeds written in near illegible cursive. Most of it was mundane ownership transfers, irrigation grants, fence easements. Then, tucked between two brittle carbon copies, he found it. A 1959 land survey. Drawn crudely but unmistakable in its outlines, it was his property. Near the bottom corner, a rectangle had been labeled Sector D, and beneath it, a note approved for exploratory shaft, Tri-Mountain Industries. His stomach turned. The initials weren't the same as MLB, but the pattern was all too familiar. Different names, same tricks. He made a copy and left the office with shaking hands. That night, he sat on his porch, the old map spread across his lap. The stars hung overhead like cold eyes, watching, judging. His father had plowed this soil. His grandfather had been buried beneath it. And none of them knew. The betrayal wasn't just theft, it was erasure. They hadn't just stolen oil, they had stolen truth. The next day, Caleb drove to the Historical Society, a dusty brick building near the edge of town where old headlines and fading photographs were filed in silence. Inside, he met Evelyn Grant, a retired teacher turned amateur historian. She wore thick glasses and a cardigan 2 sizes too big, but her mind was sharp, razor sharp. When he showed her the map and the name Tri-Mountain, something flickered behind her eyes. "That name disappeared a long time ago," she whispered. "They were drilling before the dam was even built, quietly, under different names. No one ever asked." "My family never knew," Caleb said. "Most families didn't," Evelyn replied, "especially families like yours, who didn't hold mineral rights. Back then, landowners often signed deeds they didn't fully understand or didn't sign them at all." She led him to a file cabinet in the back, pulling out a folder marked TMI Corp. Inside were grainy photos of old drill rigs, newspaper clippings, and a company brochure printed in sepia tone. In one picture, a vertical rig stood beside a one-room cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. Caleb's throat tightened. It was his grandfather's cabin, long gone now. The date on the photo, 1962. "They used a shell game," Evelyn said. "Tri-Mountain became Western Core, then Midland Drilling, then Kendrick's Energy. Same people, different masks." Caleb stared at the photo, his hands trembling. "All this time," he muttered, "they were right here, beneath us." "And they were counting on silence," Evelyn said softly, "and for a long time, they got it." Caleb left the building with a folder full of evidence, a phone full of pictures, and a soul on fire. He didn't want revenge. He didn't even want compensation. He wanted the truth dragged into the light, stripped of every lie, every name change, every rebranded logo. And most of all, he wanted it never to happen again. The morning after his meeting at the Historical Society, Caleb Morgan woke to a quiet house, but his mind was anything but still. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridgeline, and mist clung low across the field like a ghost refusing to leave. He stood at the edge of the crater with a folder of old documents under his arm and a storm building behind his eyes. It wasn't just his field anymore. It was a battlefield, and he wasn't just a farmer or a veteran. He was now a witness to something buried deep in something ongoing. He needed help, someone who could see what he saw, someone who couldn't be bought or bullied. So he made one more call. He rang Charlotte Springer, a field ecologist who happened to be Lucas's niece. She'd made headlines 2 years ago when she brought down an agricultural giant for poisoning a water table near her hometown. Fierce didn't begin to describe her. Charlotte arrived that afternoon, stepping out of her Jeep in hiking boots and a no-nonsense braid, carrying a satchel filled with sampling kits, infrared gear, and a camera with more buttons than Caleb had fingers. He told her everything about the tremor, the tunnel, the smell of sulfur, and the marked barrel with the initials. She didn't flinch, not once. Instead, she adjusted her headlamp and said, "Then let's go see what they're hiding." An hour later, the three of them, Caleb, Lucas, and Charlotte, stood once more at the edge of the sinkhole. The wind had picked up, swirling dust and leaves in uneasy spirals. The crater yawned beneath them, darker than ever. Charlotte clipped a gas monitor to her belt, shouldered a camera, and led the way down. This time, The tunnel felt hotter, like the earth itself was warning them away. The deeper they descended, the more intense the air became humid, chemical, humming with something unseen. The walls still pulsed with dark veins, glistening faintly like sweat on skin. Charlotte stopped every few feet to collect soil, scrape residue from the stone, and snap pictures. She didn't speak unless necessary, and when she did, it was in clipped phrases, concise, focused, scientific. Then came the fork. They took the right path again, the one that sloped down into the heart of the mountain. After 100 yards, the tunnel widened, and there, beneath rusted pipes and old steel beams, they saw it. A buried storage container, sealed but damaged, wedged between two collapsed support walls. Charlotte crouched beside it, brushing dirt from the surface, and pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, blueprints, maintenance logs, a binder marked Kendrick Operations Phase 4. She pulled out one sheet, unfolded it, and held it against the wall with her gloved hand. Her voice was quiet, but firm. This isn't just under your land. Caleb, this network spans miles. Caleb stepped closer. His field wasn't the only one violated. This tunnel stretched beneath his neighbors' farms, their homes, their history. He felt sick. They've been here longer than anyone knows, Charlotte said, and they're still taking. Suddenly, the gas monitor clipped to her belt began beeping rapid, high-pitched. Levels are spiking, she said. We don't have much time. They moved deeper, quickly but carefully. The next chamber was larger, reinforced with metal ribs and lined with black plastic barrels. A slow hiss came from one corner, where a pipe had cracked, leaking thick oil into the dirt. Charlotte scanned the serial numbers, took photos, then turned to Caleb. These barrels are active, and they were placed recently. She opened one with a wrench. The stench hit them instantly, raw petroleum, sharp and unmistakable. Lucas cursed. They're drilling right now. That's when Charlotte saw it tucked behind a stack of crates, a metal case, rusted at the edges, inside, wrapped in plastic photos, reports, and a set of ID badges. She flipped one over. Kendrick Energy, date issued 2 years ago. Got them, she whispered. They backed out slowly, marking the walls as they moved, every few steps. Caleb paused to stare at the glistening lines carved into the soil, the pulsing black veins, the puddles slicked with oil. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't leftover machinery. This was deliberate, ongoing, and hidden in plain sight. When they emerged into the afternoon light, the sky had turned overcast, heavy with storm clouds. Charlotte dropped her gear onto the grass, pulled out her laptop, and began uploading photos to a cloud folder. Caleb watched the slow progress bar move across the screen like a countdown to war. They can't bury this anymore, she said. Not after what we found. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. He walked to the edge of the field, looked out across the soil that had once promised peace, and made a silent vow. He wasn't going to just expose them. He was going to end them. The days that followed were thick with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that lingers after a storm, where even the birds seem hesitant to speak. Caleb Morgan moved through them like a ghost in his own life. He fed the animals. He patched a broken hinge on the barn door. He even sat on the back steps and watched the wind roll through the trees like he used to. But nothing felt the same. Something had broken. Not the land, not the tunnel. Him. It wasn't fear that hollowed him out. It was realization. All his life, Caleb had believed that being a good man, honest, quiet, steady, meant you could trust the world to leave you alone. But now he knew better. The world didn't respect quiet. It exploited it. And for years, he'd let it. Not because he was weak, but because he believed in peace. He believed in stewardship, that if you took care of the land, it would take care of you. Now he saw what they had done to that belief, twisted it, tunneled under it, and pumped it dry. Charlotte returned 3 days later with news the samples she sent off were confirmed active crude extraction, toxic runoff, and illegal pipeline markers. "This isn't just your land anymore," she said. "It's a crime scene." Lucas came by the same afternoon with a grim face and a newspaper under his arm. A small column on page 4, "Local veteran alleges illegal drilling beneath family farm." The headline was buried, but the story was real, and it was beginning to move. That night, Caleb sat at the kitchen table alone. All the evidence was there: maps, binders, test results, photos of oil pooling beneath rusted machinery. The proof was undeniable. But what gnawed at him more than anything was the memory of his father. He remembered the day he came back from the war, silent, lost, just trying to breathe again. His father had handed him a shovel and said, "Dig, plant, heal." And he had for 40 years. And all that time, something had been stealing from him, from the man who taught him to plant, from the grandfather who laid these fences, from the soil that had cradled every broken piece of him back into place. That's when something shifted inside him. The hollow turned solid. The wound turned sharp. Caleb wasn't just a man trying to protect his land anymore. He was a man ready to fight for every family who had ever been silenced by power, for every acre that had been robbed in the shadows, for the truth. The next morning, he called every local reporter he could find. When some didn't answer, he left voicemails. When others dismissed him, he emailed photos. When that didn't work, he sent the story to Charlotte's journalist contact in Nashville. By nightfall, the first feature article went live. This time, it wasn't a back page note. It was front and center. Buried beneath the farm, the tunnel, the oil, and the veteran who said no more. Something broke open after that. Not just in Caleb, in the system. Calls started coming in. Environmental groups, state investigators, even a quiet voice from a national paper wanting to look deeper. But it wasn't just attention, it was validation. What Caleb had felt deep in his gut, the crawling wrongness under his boots, the unease in the cattle before the quake, it had meant something. He wasn't crazy, he wasn't paranoid, he was right. And now, people were listening. Lucas came by one evening, watched Caleb load files into a backpack, and just said, "You're not alone in this." Caleb looked him dead in the eye and said, "I know. That's why it's finally changing." Later, as the sun dipped low, Caleb stood on the edge of the field just above the collapsed ridge and stared into the quiet. The grass swayed. The wind carried the scent of dirt and coming rain. But beneath it all, he felt something different. Strength. Not the kind you lift, not the kind you fight with. The kind that comes when a man knows who he is and why he can't look away anymore. The sun rose slowly the morning the agents arrived. Not in a rush of light, but in a quiet bloom, amber spilling over the hills, turning the mist above Caleb's fields into gold. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like the land was holding its breath. It felt like it was watching. By 8:00, the first car pulled up, unmarked, then 2 more. Then trucks with government plates and technicians unloading strange machines that Caleb couldn't name but understood instinctively. They were here to see what he saw. They were here because he made them look. Charlotte stood beside him, clipboard in hand, already briefing a young investigator. Lucas leaned against the fence, arms folded, the same quiet force as always. But Caleb just watched. His boots were planted in the soil, his soil. And for the first time since the quake, he allowed himself to feel something he'd been pushing down: vindication. 2 days later, the story hit national headlines. Veteran uncovers hidden tunnel network beneath farmland, illegal oil. Operation spanning generations, exposed in rural Tennessee, from silence to spotlight. How one man's stand changed everything. News vans parked down by the old church road. Drones buzzed overhead. Aerial shots of the crater looped on television screens across the country. But Caleb didn't speak to most reporters. He didn't want fame. He wanted the truth to finish what it started. The first arrests came quietly. 3 men in suits, all tied to Kendrick Energy through a shell corporation. One of them, Caleb remembered his name from the badge Charlotte found, had tried to flee the state. Didn't make it far. Subpoenas followed, then warrants, then court orders. By the end of the week, the Environmental Protection Agency had placed an official freeze on all operations under Kendrick's regional license. It was happening. Decades of lies, decades of trespass, decades of invisible theft dragged into the daylight by a man who had every reason to stay quiet, but didn't. At the county courthouse, they held a small ceremony. Caleb didn't want one, but Charlotte insisted. The mayor read a proclamation. The town council stood and clapped. An environmental foundation handed him a plaque with his name engraved at the top. Caleb said only this: "The land remembers what we try to forget, but it'll always speak if someone's willing to listen." Back at the farm, the real work began. Charlotte stayed on, helping oversee the environmental remediation team, soil restoration, groundwater protection, tunnel collapse prevention. Federal grants covered part of it, but Charlotte and her contacts made sure every step was documented and monitored. Lucas helped rebuild the damaged fence line and replace the storage shed they had lost near the blast site. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. They'd been through fire, smoke, and silence together. That was enough. Months passed, the headlines faded, but the change did not. Wildflowers bloomed again along the southern edge. Birds returned, so did the bees. And in the spot where the earth once split open like a wound, Caleb planted a young sycamore tree, its roots reaching deep into the soil that no longer kept secrets. One evening, as he stood on his porch, glass of iced tea in hand, he watched the tree's leaves catch the sunset. Wind whispered across the field like an old friend, brushing past him on its way home. He smiled not because it was over, but because it had begun. This was no longer a story about oil, or tunnels, or even betrayal. This was a story about what happens when someone finally says no more. When one man listens to the land and decides he won't be quiet. Not for fear, not for comfort, not for anyone. Caleb Morgan had once been a soldier, then a farmer. Now he was something else entirely. A keeper of truth, a protector of legacy, a man who stood on broken ground and made the world take notice. And in that stillness no longer haunted, no longer hollow, the land whispered back, "Thank you." For Caleb Morgan, uncovering the hidden tunnel wasn't just about oil or corruption. It was about truth that had been buried beneath generations of silence and stolen beneath the feet of good, hard-working people who were never told what lay beneath them. The earthquake didn't just shake the land, it cracked open decades of injustice, but it also gave birth to something powerful, a voice, one that had stayed quiet for too long. Because when you love something, truly love it, you don't just take care of it, you defend it. In the end, the fight wasn't just for his farm. It was for every forgotten voice that was never meant to be heard. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell. More powerful stories are on the way. Share it with someone who needs a reminder. Truth always finds a way to the surface. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.